So, Donald Trump here says it was my great honor to destroy a very large drug carrying submarine that was navigating toward the United States on a well known narco trafficking transit route. U.S. intelligence confirmed this vessel was loaded up with mostly fentanyl and other illegal narcotics. There were four known narco terrorists on board the vessel. Two of the terrorists were killed. And then talk about a number he just pulls right out of his ass. At least 25,000 Americans would die if I allowed this submarine to come ashore. Okay, based on what? The two surviving terrorists are being returned to their countries of origin. Really? That's interesting. So two terrorists who survived are being returned to their countries of origin, Ecuador and Colombia, for detention and prosecution. No U.S. forces were harmed in this strike. Under my watch, the United States of America will not tolerate narco-terrorist trafficking illegal drugs by land or by sea. Thank you for your attention to this matter, Donald J. Trump. So, yeah, this article was kind of everywhere. U.S. is repatriating survivors of its strike on suspected drug vessel. The Trump administration is repatriating two survivors of a deadly U.S. strike this week on suspected drug runners in the Caribbean Sea, rather than prosecute them or hold them in military detention, President Trump announced on Saturday. The men who survived were being returned to their home countries, Colombia and Ecuador, for detention and prosecution, the president said in a post on his Truth Social account. Mr. Trump also posted a 29-second video showing a semi-submersible vessel that was traveling partially below the water being blown up. He said two other suspected drug smugglers, who he called terrorists, had been killed in the attack. It was not immediately possible to confirm that either Colombia or Ecuador had agreed to prosecute the two men. In other words, he doesn't know that they're releasing them for a prosecution. You would think if these were terrorists who were apprehended, you may want to detain them yourself or try them here in the United States. But nah, that's it. Slap on the wrist. You're lucky you survived. Back to your home countries. You're their problem now. What? That doesn't sound like executing a foreign policy of national defense, right? If these are narco terrorists, shouldn't they be apprehended and tried? That's very strange that you're just letting them go. It's almost like you have no real evidence against them and you don't want that to be exposed. Colombia had no immediate comment. An official in Ecuador who spoke on condition of anonymity because the topic involved sensitive diplomacy said the government was confirming that one of its nationals was among the survivors. If that were the case, the official said, he would be brought to Ecuador. Mr. Trump has previously described people aboard suspected drug smuggling boats, which the United States has targeted in several deadly airstrikes since early September, as unlawful combatants. He has claimed the authority, widely disputed by legal experts, to summarily kill such suspects in military strikes as if they were enemy soldiers in a war. It was a sharp break from the traditional handling of maritime smuggling, in which the Coast Guard would intercept boats and arrest people if suspicions proved accurate. So, under normal circumstances, the Coast Guard would apprehend these boats. They would make arrests based on the evidence that they had available to them, as opposed to what we're doing, which is just killing people, saying they were terrorists, not providing any proof to substantiate these claims. The decision to transfer the two survivors, however, was in line with the Coast Guard's practice of repatriating or handing off to friendly countries people who were intercepted outside the United States as suspected traffickers. It also avoided the dilemma of what to do with the first people captured in what Mr. Trump has declared a formal armed conflict against drug cartels. Holding them as indefinite wartime detainees at the military prison at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, could have opened the door to a court's reviewing whether this really is a war as part of a habeas corpus lawsuit. Also, don't forget, these aren't Venezuelans. So now, if you detain these people, now you're pulling other countries into it. Prosecuting the man in U.S. civilian court would have raised other problems. For one, it was not known if any courtroom admissible evidence was available to demonstrate that the survivors of the attack engaged in criminal wrongdoing. Still, avoiding legal and logistical headaches by sending the men home seemed to contradict the administration's stance that suspected drug smugglers pose such a severe danger that Mr. Trump can have the military summarily Kill them. Exactly. So you can't out of one side of your mouth say, well, this is standard practice to repatriate them, while at the other side of the mouth claim the authority to just kill them without providing evidence, right? Those two things don't mix. The Trump administration has justified its attacks on drug smuggling suspects in the Caribbean as a formal armed conflict and as national self-defense, but without offering an explanation for how it can legitimately treat the crime of drug smuggling as if it were an armed attack or combatant. So if it is actual national self-defense, if it's actual counterterrorism, then wouldn't you feel an obligation to detain these people, right? If it's standard law enforcement, well, then we're not being invaded and you can't just blow them out of the water. You would have to have the Coast Guard apprehend them, okay? But, don't let this make your head hurt too much if you're a MAGA person, because this is what I voted for, right? This is the peace president at work. Here's Colombian President Gustavo Petro on U.S. strikes in the Caribbean. This is 3 minutes. We're not going to play all of it, but the most important part is right up top. But when facing an issue in the Caribbean Sea that has nothing to do with fentanyl, what the United States is producing is that what it wants is the oil of Venezuela and Guyana. Oil greed is what is behind the strategy that is throwing missiles at fishermen. Exactly. It is about as simple as that, obviously. Max Blumenthal says, it turns out the boat people the Trump-Rubio mafia has been murdering in extrajudicial fashion are such terrorists that when they survive drone strikes, they get returned to their home countries. Exactly. Make that make sense. But don't take it from Max Blumenthal. This ought to give you some insight into just how standard what's going on here actually is, how above board and how on the up and up the administration is behaving here. In surprise move, head of U.S. military for Latin America to step down. The admiral, who leads U.S. military forces in Latin America, will step down at the end of this year, 2 years ahead of schedule, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth announced on Thursday, in a surprise move amid escalating tensions with Venezuela. This guy's only been enlisted for 1 year, by the way, so it was a pretty abrupt resignation. A source familiar with the matter told Reuters that there had been tension between Admiral Alvin Halsey and Hegseth over operations in the Caribbean and questions about whether he would be fired in the days leading up to the announcements. There you go. So it looks pretty shady to me, and that's not just based on Max's take and the look we've taken at this, but based on that resignation. But who was okay with this? The No Kings network here, MSNBC. So here's Nick Cruz saying MSNBC openly endorses Donald Trump's regime change efforts in Venezuela. This is the resistance in a nutshell. The No Kings rally is a pro-war movement organized by a pro-war party. So here is Council of Foreign Relations spokesman, or he's the president now, Richard Haas. Here he is rubber stamping this regime change operation in Venezuela.
To go after a couple of boats. Yeah. This is about regime change, which, by the way, I think is potentially a good thing, given how Maduro has run Venezuela into the ground, how he stole an election, and the rest.
And the rest? What do you mean? So given how Maduro has run Venezuela into the ground and how he stole an election and the rest, by and the rest, are you talking about things that are actually our business? Because so far as an American, I haven't heard you rattle off one thing that's any fucking concern for me. Oh, he ran Venezuela into the ground and he stole an election. So that means we have to militarily overthrow him? Even if those two things are true, which I would not necessarily grant you. And to the extent they are true, it's because of our sanctions and our boot on their neck. But we could litigate that some other time. The point is, you just made a case for regime change in Venezuela, and the first two things you cited have fuck all to do with the way any American lives their life. None at all. And then the rest of it, he says. Wow. Anything?
Well, that's how brainwashed this population is. You're brainwashed as an American, and it's this way in any empire. You're brainwashed to think what goes on in the entire world is under the purview of your empire. You're trained to think like a citizen of an empire, not like a citizen of a country.
Exactly.
Getting involved in Latin America doesn't always turn out
That's why I said in principle.
Yeah.
This is like there's a complicated backstory.
Yeah.
So we've got to be really careful. It's one thing to oust a regime, and we could probably deal with Maduro some version of how we dealt with Noriega in Panama, but it's something very different once you've ousted a regime to successfully midwife the emergence of an enduring, more positive regime.
Oh, you
Lots
don't
of things
say.
have to happen politically, economically. A lot of signals have to be sent.
Again, okay, so I mean, look, I mean, there's ways you could attack this, but just the assumption that it's our business is the arrogance of empire. Like the assumption that it's just okay for us to go ahead and do this. And hey, we have to be careful, we have to be prudent because these things can go sideways. Right? Like, yeah, they can go sideways, but even to get to that place requires you to accept the premise that this is an acceptable way for us to behave. Well, you're a socialist who ran his country into the ground and you stole an election, so obviously it's fine if we blow up your ships and let the CIA run amok in your country and threaten a ground invasion and put sanctions on you. Like the idea that that's an acceptable way to and it's funny how we are watching this clip in the wake of the No Kings March because we just showed you on the ground the kind of people who attend that march. They watch this and they internalize this, right?
Yep.
And it's all a parlor game. Well, we can do it. I mean, it makes sense, but we have to be careful because these things can go sideways. It's all realpolitik. And, none of it actually addresses the moral question of why are we even considering this action in the first place? Why is it that we have to clearly, I mean, I would essentially say fabricate, that these narco-terrorists are running up this fentanyl at the pace that they say, and we have to blow them out of the water to stop them. You're telling me this can't be dealt with? Yeah, if people are bringing drugs into your waters, you can do it the way we always do it, which is you apprehend them, and then based on the evidence, you act accordingly. You don't just blow a boat out of the water, kill everybody on board, and then in the one instance where two of them survive, what do? Do we detain them like the terrorists that they are? No, we let them go. We let them back. Hey, slap on it. Don't do that again. None of that narco-terrorism around here. Go back and be nice. Come on, is that how we would treat them if we actually had evidence against them? Of course not. Of course not. It's an absolute clown show.
Well, I mean, I understand Trump has some clients at Mar-a-Lago who get their blow from one of those guys.
Yeah, right, exactly.
So that was why he went easy on him.
Yeah. So that's the latest. That's the latest in the up-and-coming regime change war in Venezuela, courtesy of the peace president. He's on a roll this week.
Yeah, no, you watch like Richard Haas there, and it's the function of these things like MSNBC is really to give the illusion, this is true of all of these news programs. It's to give people the illusion that they live in a democracy and they're personally invested in this kind of a conversation. Yeah, well, Venezuela, it's a complicated situation. You don't know the first thing about the fucking actual motives of what these people are doing. And if you read these articles in the Atlantic and the kinds of outlets that if you really want to continue down this road caters to people who would be watching Richard Haas here and taking him seriously, the running theme is America is always trying to do the right thing, but it's a tough world.
Right.
And we're trying to balance our idealism and our desire to bring a good life to all people with the fact that there are bad actors out there. And how do you balance that? We never do anything because we're just evil. Like never.
Right. Exactly.
Except Trump, which is why we have to
Trump.
Go out and do a march with no demands.
Exactly.
Please clap.